I have a New Year's wish, and it's gonna change everything.
The ballroom glittered like a fallen constellation, every surface catching and throwing light until the air itself seemed to shimmer with wealth. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, their teardrops refracting golden light across designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Champagne flowed from a fountain sculpted to look like angels pouring liquid stars, and a 12-piece orchestra played something classical and forgettable in the corner. The annual Adrian Castellano New Year's Eve Gala was, as always, the event of the season. A glittering parade of Silicon Valley moguls, Hollywood celebrities, and old money aristocrats who still pretended tech money wasn't real money. Adrian stood at the center of it all, holding court like a king who'd never questioned his throne. His dark hair was styled with just enough product to look effortless, though Jasmine knew he'd spend 20 minutes on it that afternoon. His sharp blue eyes moved across the crowd with the precision of a man cataloging assets. Who was worth talking to? Who might invest in his next venture? Who could open doors he hadn't yet kicked down? He wore power the way other men wore cologne, something invisible but undeniable that announced his presence before he even spoke. The black tuxedo was Tom Ford, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been born on his body. The watch on his wrist cost more than most people's cars. When he laughed, which he was doing now, at something a senator had said, it was the kind of laugh that made people want to be in on the joke. Jasmine stood beside him, 18 inches away and 1,000 miles distant. She'd positioned herself exactly where she always did at these events, close enough to appear devoted, far enough to stay out of his way. Her gold dress caught the light beautifully. She'd chosen it specifically for that, wanting to shine on the night she stopped trying to be seen by him. The fabric hugged her curves in a way that should have drawn his attention, but Adrian hadn't looked at her, really looked at her, in so long she'd stopped counting the days. Her natural hair was styled in a sleek, close-cropped cut that emphasized the elegant lines of her face, her rich brown skin glowing under the soft golden light. She'd done her own makeup, painting her lips in a deep berry shade that made her look both regal and dangerous. Around her neck, nothing. She'd left the $50,000 necklace Adrian had given her 3 days ago in its velvet box on her dresser. She didn't need his diamonds tonight. Tonight, she needed her courage. The clutch in her hands was small, golden, and contained exactly one item. Adrian was deep in conversation with Senator Mitchell, a silver-haired man who controlled various tech regulations and therefore required constant schmoozing. They were discussing some bill, some policy, something that mattered very much to Adrian's bottom line and not at all to the actual humans it would affect. Jasmine had learned to tune out these conversations years ago. She'd also learned to smile pleasantly while men talked past her, through her, around her, as if being Mrs. Adrian Castellano made her a trophy to display, but not a person to address. She glanced up at the massive digital clock mounted above the bar. It had been counting down all night, building anticipation for the midnight moment when everyone would pretend this new year would be different from the last. 60 seconds. Her heart beat steady and strong in her chest. She'd imagined this moment so many times over the past 3 months, lying awake at 2 a.m. while Adrian snored beside her, oblivious to her insomnia. Standing in the shower, letting the water wash away silent tears. Sitting in her lawyer's office, signing papers with hands that didn't shake because she'd already done all her shaking in private. She'd rehearsed the words until they stopped feeling like a betrayal and started feeling like liberation. 55 seconds. Around them, the energy in the room was building. People were starting to position themselves near loved ones, grabbing fresh glasses of champagne, preparing for the kiss at midnight that would seal their commitment for another year. Jasmine watched a young couple in the corner, barely 25, staring at each other like they'd invented love. She remembered being them once. She remembered believing Adrian when he'd promised her the world, back when his eyes actually focused on her face when he spoke. 50 seconds. She reached into her clutch and felt the envelope. cream-colored, expensive stationery, the kind Adrian insisted they use for everything because presentation matters. Inside, 3 months of decision-making, 2 lawyers' signatures, 1 clear path forward. Her fingers brushed the edge, and something in her chest loosened. After 5 years of holding her breath, waiting for him to notice she was suffocating, she was finally about to exhale. 45 seconds. "Adrian," she said softly. He didn't hear her, or maybe he did hear her but chose to ignore her, the way he'd been choosing to ignore her for 3 years. The senator was saying something about quarterly projections, and Adrian was nodding with that intense focus he reserved for things that could make him money. "Adrian," she repeated, louder this time. He held up one finger, wait, without even looking at her. The gesture was so automatic, so casually dismissive, that she almost laughed. How many times had she been silenced by that finger? How many thoughts had died on her tongue because his call, his meeting, his conversation was always more important? 40 seconds. "Adrian," she said again, and this time her voice cut through the ambient noise of the party with crystalline clarity. He turned finally, irritation flashing across his handsome face before he caught himself and rearranged his features into something approximating patience. The mask was so practiced, she wondered if he even knew he was wearing it anymore. "What is it, Jazz? I'm kind of in the middle of—" "I have a New Year's wish," she interrupted. The words landed in the space between them like stones in still water. Something in her tone, calm, certain, irrevocable, made him actually look at her. His blue eyes, usually so busy scanning for the next opportunity, fixed on her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or the first stirring of dread, some animal instinct that sensed the predator before seeing it. 35 seconds. "Can it wait?" he asked, his jaw tightening in that way it did when things didn't go according to his schedule. "We're about to count down." Around them, conversations were starting to fade. People had excellent radar for drama, especially at parties where the champagne flowed and inhibitions loosened. Jasmine could feel eyes turning towards them, curious and hungry. Good. She'd been invisible at these events for too long. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it with witnesses. "No," she said, her voice steady and clear as a bell. Adrian's smile was starting to crack at the edges. He was aware now of the attention, the way the senator had taken a subtle step back, the way the people nearest them had stopped pretending not to listen. He leaned in closer, his jaw dropping to a harsh whisper. "Jazz, whatever this is, we can discuss it at home. You're embarrassing." "I'm embarrassing you?" she said, louder than she'd meant to, and the question carried. More heads turned. The orchestra's volume seemed to drop, or maybe the room was just going quiet around them. "It's interesting, Adrian, because I've spent 5 years trying not to embarrass you, making sure I looked perfect, said the right things, played my part. Do you know what's embarrassing? Being invisible to your own husband." 30 seconds. The countdown clock was impossible to ignore now, its glowing numbers reflected in champagne glasses and wide eyes. Adrian's face had gone from confused to alarmed, his gaze darting around the room as if calculating the damage, running the social mathematics of a scene at his own gala. He could see him trying to contain this, how to smooth it over, how to make her stop talking without making things worse. "Jasmine," his voice had taken on a warning edge. "Not here, not now." She pulled the envelope from her clutch. It felt lighter than it should have given what it contained. Funny how the most life-changing things could weigh almost nothing. She held it between them like a shield, like a sword, like the ending she'd been too afraid to write until now. "I have a New Year's wish," she continued, her voice steady and clear as a bell. "Do you know what is embarrassing, Adrian? Being invisible to your own husband." 30 seconds. The countdown clock was impossible to ignore now, its glowing numbers reflected in champagne glasses and wide eyes. Adrian's face had gone from confused to alarmed, his gaze darting around the room as if calculating the damage, running the social mathematics of a scene at his own gala. He could see him trying to contain this, how to smooth it over, how to make her stop talking without making things worse. "Jasmine," his voice had taken on a warning edge. "Not here, not now."
She pulled the envelope from her clutch. It felt lighter than it should have given what it contained. Funny how the most life-changing things could weigh almost nothing. She held it between them like a shield, like a sword, like the ending she'd been too afraid to write until now. "I have a New Year's wish," she continued, her voice steady and clear as a bell. 25 seconds. The crowd around them had formed a loose circle, no longer pretending to be doing anything other than watching. They could see phones coming out of pockets and purses. Of course they were. This would be all over social media before the night was through. Adrian Castellano's carefully curated image cracking in real time at his own party. "My wish is very simple," Jasmine continued, meeting his eyes and refusing to look away, even when she saw panic rising in them. "I wish to be seen. I wish to be valued. I wish to be more than a beautiful accessory in your perfect life." 20 seconds.
The candles had burned down to nubs, wax pooling on the crystal holders like tears frozen mid-fall. Jasmine sat at one end of their ridiculously long dining table, 12 seats for 2 people who never ate together, and stared at the plate across from her. The filet mignon had gone cold an hour ago, the garlic mashed potatoes congealing into something that looked more like paste than food. She'd made his favorite meal, worn the red dress he'd once said made her look like a sunset, lit candles, put on the jazz playlist he used to hum along to when they were dating, back when he still had time for things like music and her. Her phone buzzed against the white tablecloth, obscenely loud in the silent penthouse. "Deal running late. Eat without me. Sorry, babe." Jasmine picked up the phone with steady hands and read the message 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it. She understood it perfectly. She read it because some masochistic part of her wanted to memorize the exact words, the casual dismissal, the empty apology that cost him nothing to type and her everything to receive. "Sorry, babe." The same words as last year. She'd checked her old messages to be sure, scrolling back 12 months to their 4th anniversary, finding the identical text with slightly different timing. The year before that, he'd at least made it home by 10 p.m., bringing wilted roses from the hospital gift shop, because apparently he'd forgotten until the last possible moment that they were married. This year, he hadn't even pretended he'd make it. She stared at the word sorry until the letters stopped looking like language and started looking like random shapes. 7 letters that should mean something: regret, remorse, a promise to do better, but had been said so many times they'd worn smooth, like river stones rubbed of all their edges. Sorry, sorry, sorry. He was always sorry, never different, but always sorry. Jasmine set the phone down very carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something, though she suspected the thing that needed shattering had already broken quietly, without drama, sometime between the 3rd canceled date and the 100th empty apology. She should cry. She'd cried last year, mascara running down her face while she ate expensive steak alone and wondered what she'd done wrong, how she could be better, more understanding, more supportive. But tonight, the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was something else, something colder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous than sadness. Clarity. 5 years ago, she'd stood in a different dress, white, expensive, covered in lace that Adrian's mother had chosen, and listened to him promise her the world. "You're my everything, Jazz. We're going to build an incredible life together." She'd believed him. God, she'd believed him so completely she'd handed in her resignation at the marketing firm where she'd been climbing fast, turning down a promotion because Adrian said they should focus on our future, which apparently meant his future while she played supporting actress in the background. "Your career will always be there," he'd said, kissing her temple in that way that used to make her knees weak. "But this is our moment. Our time. Let me take care of you while I get the company off the ground. Then we'll have all the time in the world."
The company had gotten off the ground, then it had soared, then it had become a billion-dollar empire, and somehow, in all that success, there was still never any time for her. Jasmine stood, the red dress whispering against her skin, and walked past the cold dinner to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of the Bordeaux they were saving for tonight, because apparently she was the only one who remembered tonight mattered, and carried it to the guest bedroom, the one Adrian had converted into his second office, before realizing he didn't need it because he was never home anyway. She opened her laptop, the screen's glow harsh in the dim room, and typed with wine-steadied fingers, "How to start a digital marketing agency." The search results bloomed across the screen like possibilities she'd forgotten existed. Business licenses, client acquisition strategies, portfolio building, LLC formation. Words that used to excite her back when she'd been Jasmine Porter, rising star at Madison & Associates, before she'd become Mrs. Adrian Castellano, professional ghost. Outside the window, the city glittered with thousands of lights, each one a life being lived, a dream being chased, a person who hadn't given up themselves for someone else's ambition. Jasmine clicked the first link, then the second, then the third. She didn't close the laptop until 3 a.m., long after Adrian had come home and gone straight to bed without checking if she was still awake, still waiting, still hoping. She wasn't hoping anymore. She was planning.
Jasmine had become an expert at moving silently through 4,000 square feet of marble and glass. She'd learned which floorboards in the hallway creaked, which doors groaned when opened, how to make coffee without the machine's gurgle disturbing Adrian's pre-dawn routine. Not that he would have noticed. By 6 a.m. he was already gone, his side of the bed cold, his coffee mug rinsed and placed in the dishwasher with the mechanical precision of a man who'd optimized every minute of his day, except the minutes that might have included his wife. She existed in the spaces between his schedule. She ate breakfast after he left, worked while he was gone, and made herself scarce when he returned at 11, sometimes midnight, smelling like conference rooms and ambition. On weekends, he took calls in his office with the door closed, his voice rising and falling in that animated way he used for business, the way he used to speak to her back when she was interesting, back when she was new. October passed in a blur of invisibility. She attended his company dinners wearing borrowed enthusiasm, sitting beside him at tables full of people who asked Adrian about his vision, his strategy, his next move. No one asked Jasmine anything except where she'd gotten her dress or whether she'd tried the salmon. She smiled until her face ached and played her role flawlessly. Adrian Castellano's wife. Not Jasmine, never just Jasmine. That woman had been filed away somewhere, archived like old emails nobody needed anymore. But in the guest bedroom, surrounded by notebooks and laptop glow and the terrifying freedom of possibility, Jasmine was building something that belonged only to her. She'd spent 3 weeks creating a portfolio using mock campaigns and hypothetical clients, teaching herself the new platforms and strategies she'd missed during her 5-year hiatus from relevance. Then she'd done something that felt like jumping off a cliff. She'd reached out to Maya Chen, owner of a small boutique in Hayes Valley that Jasmine had been quietly following on Instagram. The pitch email had taken her 2 hours to write and 30 seconds to send. Maya's response came back in 48. "This is exactly what I need. When can we start?" $2,000. That's what the 3-month contract paid. Barely anything by Adrian's standards. Pocket change he'd spend on a business lunch without blinking. But when Jasmine saw the deposit hit her new business account, she sat at the desk and stared at the numbers until they blurred. It was the first money she'd earned in 5 years, the first concrete proof that she was still capable, still valuable, still something more than decorative. It felt like oxygen after drowning.
She started waking at 5:30, working in focused bursts before Adrian's alarm went off, building Maya's social media presence with the same careful attention she'd once given to Fortune 500 clients. She created content calendars, designed graphics, wrote captions that made people stop scrolling. Maya's engagement tripled in the first month. Her sales increased by 40%. She sent Jasmine a gift basket with a note, "You're a magician. Can I refer you to friends?" Jasmine cried reading that note. Not sad tears this time, but something fiercer. Relief, maybe, or resurrection. 2 days later, Adrian found her in the living room reviewing analytics on her laptop. He barely glanced at the screen before dropping a bomb disguised as a request. "Hey babe, can you plan the company holiday party? Victoria's too swamped and you're so good at this stuff. Just keep it under 200 people, make it elegant, you know what I like." It wasn't a question. It never was. Jasmine closed her laptop slowly, carefully, trapping the fury before it could escape her throat. "Sure," she said, her voice pleasant and empty. "I'll handle it." "You're the best." He kissed the top of her head, a gesture so automatic it might have been programmed, and disappeared back into his office. She sat in the expensive silence of their penthouse and felt the weight of it. She could build businesses, land clients, create value from nothing. But to Adrian, she was still just the person who planned parties and looked good in photographs. Perfect and useful. Never powerful. Never equal. That night, while Adrian slept beside her, Jasmine opened her laptop under the covers and responded to 3 referrals from Maya. By morning, she had 2 new clients lined up. By the end of the week, she'd planned Adrian's perfect holiday party. Ice sculptures, champagne towers, a string quartet, every detail exquisite, and registered her business as an LLC. She called it Reclaim Digital. The name felt like a promise she was finally ready to keep.
Jasmine woke on her 33rd birthday to silence and an empty bed. The sheets on Adrian's side were already cold, which meant he'd left early, or maybe he'd never come to bed at all. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something. A text, a note on the nightstand, flowers in the hallway, some small acknowledgement that today she'd been born, that her existence on this planet marked another year, that she mattered enough to remember. Nothing. She checked her phone. Messages from her mother, her college roommate, 2 former co-workers who still kept in touch. Nothing from Adrian. She scrolled through their text thread and found his last message from yesterday. "Leaving for Singapore early tomorrow, back Friday. Love you." Automated affection, sent between meetings, probably while he was already thinking about the next thing. He'd forgotten, or he'd never known. She genuinely couldn't remember if she'd mentioned it, if she'd dropped hints, if she'd circled the date on the calendar that hung in the kitchen and that he never looked at. At some point, she'd stopped expecting him to remember things about her. It hurt less that way. Jasmine got up, showered, and dressed in jeans and a sweater, the kind of comfortable clothes she never wore when Adrian was home because he preferred her in dresses, in heels, in costume. She made herself coffee and sat at the dining table where she'd eaten dinner alone so many times it had stopped feeling lonely and started feeling normal. She should be sad. She should call him and make him feel guilty. She should do something other than this cold, hollow acceptance. Instead, she opened her laptop and checked her business email. Waiting in her inbox like an early birthday present, a response from Marcus Thompson, VP of Marketing at a mid-sized tech company she'd been pursuing for weeks. "Loved your proposal. Let's do a $15,000 monthly retainer starting December 1st. Send over the contract." Jasmine read it 3 times, then pushed back from the table and laughed, a sound that came out half triumph, half hysteria. $15,000 a month. Her corporate client, her breakthrough. She was really doing this, building something real while her husband was halfway around the world forgetting she existed. She channeled everything, the hurt, the anger, the bitter satisfaction, into work.
She drafted the contract with shaking hands, sent it before she could second-guess herself, then landed 2 more consultations from referrals. By the time the sun set on her 33rd birthday, Reclaim Digital had grown from a desperate midnight Google search into something that might actually sustain her. The name had come to her weeks ago, but today it felt prophetic. Reclaim, taking back what she'd given away, remembering who she'd been before she'd made herself smaller to fit into someone else's life. That evening, she did something she'd never done before. She went to the bakery down the street and bought herself a slice of chocolate cake. Not a whole cake. That felt too sad, too much like admitting defeat. Just one perfect slice with dark frosting and raspberry filling. She ate it at the kitchen counter, alone, savoring every bite while the city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. When she finished, she wiped her mouth, poured a glass of wine, and opened her laptop again. This time, she didn't search for business advice. She searched for divorce attorneys in San Francisco, filtering by reviews and expertise in high-net-worth separations. She made a list of 3, then selected the top-rated one, Catherine Reeves, who had a sharp smile in her profile photo and a reputation for not backing down. Jasmine clicked the Schedule Consultation button before she could talk herself out of it. The video call connected within minutes. Apparently, Catherine worked late, or maybe she just sensed desperation like a shark sensing blood. "Jasmine Castellano," Catherine said, her voice crisp and professional. "What can I do for you?" "I'm exploring options," Jasmine said carefully, as if saying the words too plainly might make them too real. "Regarding my marriage." Catherine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened with understanding. "How long have you been married?" 5 years. Anniversary was last month. "And does your husband know you're calling me?" Jasmine smiled, and even through the screen she could see Catherine recognize it for what it was. Sadness, wrapped in resignation, wrapped in something harder. "He doesn't notice anything about me anymore." "Then let's make sure he notices this," Catherine said. "Tell me everything." When Adrian called 3 days later from Singapore, his voice crackling with jet lag and excitement about the deal he'd closed, Jasmine was sitting at her desk reviewing the preliminary separation paperwork Catherine had sent over. She listened to him talk about meetings and contracts and opportunities, and when he finally paused for breath, she waited for him to remember, to apologize, to acknowledge what he'd missed. He didn't. "Sounds amazing," she said, her voice steady. "I'm proud of you." After they hung up, she signed the consultation agreement with Catherine Reeves and scheduled a follow-up for the following week. Happy birthday to her. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, her mother's voice fractured and strange, saying words that didn't make sense. Heart attack, ambulance, too late, gone. Jasmine's father, her steady, gentle father who'd taught her to ride a bike and balance a checkbook and never settle for less than she deserved, had collapsed in his garden and died before they could get him to the hospital. She called Adrian immediately, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "Jazz, it's the middle of the night." "My dad died," she said, and the words came out as a sob, raw and ugly and desperate. "Adrian, my dad is dead. I need you. Please come home." There was a pause, and she heard him sit up, heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp. His voice changed, became softer, more careful. "Oh God, baby, I'm so sorry. What happened?" She told him through tears, her voice breaking on every other word. He made the right sounds, said the right things, and when she finally stopped crying long enough to breathe, he said what she needed to hear. "I'm coming home right now. Just hold on, okay? I'll be there soon." She held on. She waited. She sat on their bed in the dark and stared at the door, needing him with an intensity that frightened her, needing his arms around her, needing to not be alone with this crushing weight. At 6 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Adrian, babe, I'm so sorry. Back-to-back meetings I can't cancel. Investors flew in from Tokyo.
I'll be home tonight, I promise. I love you." Jasmine stared at the text until the letters blurred. Then she got dressed, booked a flight to Sacramento, and went to bury her father without her husband. The funeral was on Thursday. Rain fell in sheets, turning the cemetery into a muddy reflection of her grief. Jasmine stood at the graveside in a black dress she'd bought alone, holding an umbrella that kept slipping because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her mother stood beside her, aunts and uncles and cousins forming a circle of support around the hole in the ground where they were putting the man who'd walked her down the aisle 5 years ago, beaming with pride, whispering, "He better treat you like a queen." The flowers arrived during the service, an enormous arrangement of white roses and lilies, ostentatious and expensive and utterly wrong for a man who loved his simple garden and homegrown tomatoes. The card was tucked among the blooms in Adrian's angular handwriting. "Sorry I couldn't make it. You understand. Love, Adrian." Jasmine stared at that text until the letters blurred. Then she got dressed, booked a flight to Sacramento, and went to bury her father without her husband. The question hung in the rain-soaked air, heavy with everything unsaid. Around them, relatives pretended not to listen, but Jasmine could feel their judgment, their pity, their confirmation of what they'd probably suspected for years, that Adrian Castellano was too important for family, too busy for love, too consumed by success to show up when it actually mattered. He had something urgent, Jasmine heard herself say, the lie smooth and practiced because she'd been making excuses for him for so long it had become reflex. Work thing he couldn't cancel. Her mother's eyes, brown like Jasmine's but harder, wiser, worn down by her own marriage to a good man, said everything her mouth didn't. "You deserve better. Your father would have told you to leave. I'm telling you to leave." But out loud, she just squeezed her hand and said, "He should have been here." "I know," Jasmine whispered. That night, she flew back to San Francisco and let herself into the empty penthouse. Adrian had texted that he'd be late. Another dinner, another opportunity, another thing more important than her. She didn't cry. She had cried all her tears into her father's grave, and now there was nothing left but a cold, crystalline clarity. She opened her laptop and created a new bank account under her maiden name. She transferred money from their joint account, not enough to be obvious, just enough to survive. She opened a new document and began documenting the missed anniversary, the forgotten birthday, the funeral he skipped, dates, times, text messages, evidence of a marriage that existed only on paper. Catherine had told her to keep records. If this goes to court, documentation matters. Jasmine documented everything. When Adrian finally came home at midnight, she was in bed with the lights off, pretending to sleep, her phone hidden under her pillow, showing a spreadsheet of his absences. He kissed her forehead, another automatic gesture, and whispered, "Sorry about your dad, babe." She kept her eyes closed and her breathing steady, and thought, "This is war now. You just don't know it yet."
The email came on a gray December morning while Adrian was in the shower. The subject line deceptively simple. Revenue report, December 15th. Jasmine opened it with coffee warming her hands and watched the numbers load on her screen. Total revenue since September, $103,847. She stared at those digits until they burned into her retinas. 6 figures in 3 months. Her business, the thing she'd started out of spite and desperation in a guest bedroom, had crossed a threshold she'd thought would take years to reach. She'd built a team of 3 freelancers, landed contracts with brands Adrian would recognize if he ever looked at her laptop screen, created something real and valuable and entirely hers. The shower shut off down the hall. Adrian would emerge in 12 minutes. She'd timed his routine so precisely she could set a watch by it. Dress in another perfect suit, kiss her forehead without really seeing her, and leave for another day of being important.
She closed the laptop before he entered the bedroom, some instinct telling her to keep this victory private, protected, away from his ability to diminish it. "Morning," he said, knotting his tie with practiced efficiency. He smelled like expensive cologne and ambition. "Morning," she echoed, sipping her coffee, watching him move through their bedroom like she was furniture. She wanted to tell him. God, part of her desperately wanted to grab his shoulders and say, "Look at me, really look. I'm not failing. I'm flying. I built something while you ignored me. I'm becoming someone without your name, without your money, without your permission." But she knew what would happen if she did. He'd say something like, "That's great, babe," in a tone that suggested it was cute, adorable even, that she had a little hobby to keep herself busy. Or worse, he'd offer to help, meaning take over, optimize it, make it his the way he'd made everything his. So she stayed silent and let him leave without knowing that his wife had become someone he might have actually wanted to meet, if only he'd bothered to look. The headhunters started calling that week. Someone at one of her client companies had noticed her work, and suddenly Jasmine Porter, she'd started using her maiden name professionally, another small act of reclamation, was on everyone's radar. The offers came in waves, senior positions at established agencies, consulting gigs that paid obscene hourly rates, opportunities that would have made the version of herself from 5 years ago weep with joy. Then came the call from Sarah Chen at Luminous Creative, one of the top digital agencies on the West Coast. "We want you as a partner," Sarah said without preamble. "Equal equity split with the 3 founders. Base salary of $250,000 plus profit sharing. We've been watching your work, Jasmine. You're exactly what we need." $250,000, plus equity, plus the chance to build something even bigger than what she'd created alone in her loneliness. Jasmine sat in the guest bedroom office after the call ended and realized what this meant. She could leave. Not theoretically, not someday, not when she'd saved enough or built enough or become enough. Now. She was financially independent. She didn't need Adrian's money, his penthouse, his name on her credit cards. She could walk away today and survive. No, not just survive, thrive. The question that paralyzed her wasn't about money anymore. It was about courage. That night, Adrian lay beside her, scrolling through his phone, the blue light casting shadows across his face. He laughed at something, typed a response, completely absorbed in whatever was more interesting than the woman 6 inches away from him. Jasmine stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She'd spent 5 years making herself smaller, quieter, less. She'd erased her own ambitions to support his. She'd believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant disappearing. And look where it had gotten her. Married to a man who didn't know her birthday, who'd missed her father's funeral, who lay beside her every night and never once asked what she was thinking or dreaming or becoming. But leaving meant admitting failure. It meant facing her mother's sympathy and her friends' questions and the gossip that would follow. Adrian Castellano's wife left him. Can you believe it? She had everything. Except she didn't have everything. She had nothing that mattered. Jasmine turned on her side, facing away from Adrian and his glowing phone. Tomorrow she'd call Catherine and tell her to finalize the papers. Tomorrow she'd accept Sarah's offer. Tomorrow she'd start planning her exit strategy. But tonight, she let herself lie in the expensive sheets of her expensive prison and count down the days until she'd finally have the courage to save herself. The number, she realized, was getting smaller.
Catherine Reeves' office sat on the 32nd floor of a building that looked down on the city like a judge passing sentence. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and a view that cost more than most people's houses. Jasmine sat across from Catherine's sleek glass desk and tried not to feel like she was confessing to a crime instead of contemplating freedom. Catherine was everything her website promised. Sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, the kind of woman who probably billed by the minute and made every second count. She'd spent the last 20 minutes reviewing Jasmine's documentation with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays, occasionally making notes in handwriting so precise it looked printed. "California is a no-fault state," Catherine said, without looking up from the spreadsheet of Adrian's absences. "You don't need to prove he did anything wrong, but emotional neglect, consistent absence, failure to support you emotionally, these things can influence spousal support arrangements, especially given the disparity in your incomes." "I don't want his money," Jasmine said, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. Catherine's pen stopped moving. She looked up, one perfectly shaped eyebrow rising toward her hairline. "He's worth approximately $1.2 billion. You've been married 5 years. You're entitled to—" "I know what I'm entitled to," Jasmine interrupted. "I don't want it. I have my own business. I just accepted a partnership offer. I'll make my own money." Catherine set down her pen with deliberate care, the kind of gesture that suggested she was recalculating something fundamental. "Then why are you hesitating?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through Jasmine's carefully constructed composure. She'd been expecting legal advice, procedural explanations, discussions of asset division and filing timelines. She hadn't expected this, someone seeing straight through to the fear she'd been tarrying like a second skeleton. "I'm not—" Jasmine started, then stopped because the lie wouldn't form. Her throat felt tight. "Because once I do this, it's real. It's not just thoughts in my head or papers I can shred. It's permanent. And then I'll be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Alone?" Catherine supplied, her voice gentler now, not pitying, just factual, the way a doctor might diagnose a broken bone. Jasmine nodded, something hot and shameful burning behind her eyes. 5 years ago, I thought I'd found my person, my forever, and now I'm sitting here about to throw it away, and what if I'm wrong? What if he changes? What if I'm giving up too easily?" Catherine leaned back in her leather chair, studying Jasmine with an expression that probably seen this exact moment play out in 100 different variations. "How many anniversaries has he missed or ruined?" 2 completely, 3 partially. "How many birthdays has he forgotten?" "This year. Probably last year too, but he recovered with a last-minute gift." "Your father's funeral, did he attend?" The question hit like a physical blow. Jasmine shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Here's what I know," Catherine said, pulling a manila folder from her desk drawer. "I've been practicing family law for 15 years. I've seen marriages end for every reason imaginable: infidelity, abuse, money, boredom. You know what I've never seen? A marriage survive when one person stops showing up. Not physically. Physically is easy. Emotionally. Your husband checked out of this marriage years ago. The only question is when you're going to do the same." She slid a stack of papers across the desk, cream-colored, official, terrifyingly final. Jasmine could see her name at the top: Jasmine Porter Castellano, petitioner. "You're already alone, honey," Catherine said quietly. "This just makes it official." Jasmine stared at the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words looked so clinical, so sterile, nothing like the messy reality of loving someone who'd forgotten how to love you back. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen Catherine offered. "What if I regret it?" she whispered. "What if you regret staying?" Catherine countered. Jasmine thought about another year of cold dinners, forgotten dates, sleeping beside someone who treated her like expensive wallpaper. She thought about her father's funeral, standing alone while rain soaked through her shoes. She thought about the partnership offer sitting in her inbox, the business she'd built, the woman she was becoming in the spaces Adrian never bothered to look. She signed her name in 3 places, the pen scratching across paper like a key turning in a lock. Catherine witnessed the signature, then placed the papers back in the folder with satisfied efficiency. "I'll have these filed after the holidays. Better to serve him in the new year, fresh start and all that." "When?" Jasmine asked. Catherine smiled, sharp and knowing.
When do you want him served? Jasmine thought about Adrian's New Year's Eve gala, the one he'd been planning for months, the biggest event of his social calendar. All those investors and celebrities and people who thought Adrian Castellano had the perfect life. New Year's Eve, she said, at midnight. Catherine's smile widened. Now that's what I call a resolution.
Adrian came home at 8:30 on the 28th, which was early by his standards and suspicious by any objective measure. Jasmine was curled on the couch with her laptop, reviewing final edits to a campaign that would launch in January. Her January, in her new life, at Luminous Creative, where people would actually know her name. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. He looked nervous. Adrian never looked nervous. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie in that way that used to make her heart skip. Now it just looked rehearsed. "I picked up sushi from that place you like." The place she liked. He'd remembered something, which meant he wanted something or felt guilty about something. Jasmine closed her laptop slowly. Okay. They ate at the kitchen island, not the dining table because that felt too formal, too much like the anniversary dinner he'd missed. Adrian made small talk about his day, a deal that was closing, something about market projections that she stopped listening to halfway through. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small blue box. Tiffany's, of course. "I know I've been absent lately," he said, sliding the box across the marble countertop. "I wanted to do something special, for us." Jasmine opened the box because that's what she was supposed to do. Inside, nestled in white silk, was a diamond necklace that probably cost more than her first car. Emerald-cut stones set in platinum, catching the kitchen light and throwing rainbows across her hands. Objectively beautiful, objectively meaningless. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice flat as paper. Adrian's smile faltered. "You don't seem excited." She looked at him, really looked at him, this man she'd married, this stranger who thought jewelry could substitute for presents. "When's my birthday, Adrian?" He blinked, confusion crossing his handsome face. "It's, in the fall, right? September? October?" "November 14th, Jasmine said quietly. 2 months ago." The color drained from his face in stages, like watching a light dim. "Babe, I'm sorry, I've been completely slammed with, what's my favorite color?" "What?" "My favorite color. We've been married 5 years. What's my favorite color?" Adrian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't know. Blue? Green?" "Burgundy," she said, "like the wine we had on our first date, the one I always order, the one I wore to our wedding reception." She picked up the necklace, let it dangle from her fingers like a question mark made of diamonds. "What's the name of my business?" "What business?" The laugh that escaped her was hollow and broken, the sound of something vital cracking. "Exactly." She set the necklace down between them, a $50,000 symbol of everything wrong with their marriage. "I don't want diamonds, Adrian. I wanted you." "You have me," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "Jazz, I know I've been working too much. I know I've been distant, but this is temporary. Once the Q1 launches are done." "It's always temporary," Jasmine interrupted. "It's always once this deal closes or after this launch or when things calm down. Things never calm down for you, Adrian. There's always another deal, another opportunity, another reason I come second or third or not at all." Panic was creeping into his eyes now, the realization that his usual solutions weren't working. "We can fix this. We'll do marriage counseling. I'll block out time. You'll what? Actually show up? Not cancel?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "You missed my father's funeral, Adrian. You sent flowers with a card that said, 'You understand.' Do you know what that felt like? Standing at my dad's grave, alone, while everyone asked where my husband was?" "I had investors. You always have investors." The words came out louder than she intended, echoing in the cavernous kitchen. "You always have something more important, and I'm the thing that can wait." Adrian stood up, running his hands through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. "Okay, Okay, you're right. I've been a terrible husband, but we can fix this. People go through rough patches. We just need time, Jasmine finished. We need time. We've had 5 years, Adrian. You've had 5 years to notice I'm fading, to ask how I'm doing, to remember my birthday or show up when I needed you. How much more time do you need to start caring? I do care, he said, and she almost believed him because his voice cracked on the words. I love you, Jazz. She looked at him. This man, she loved her the way someone loves a possession, a beautiful thing to display but never actually see, and felt something inside her settle into cold, final certainty. I'm going to wear something special to your New Year's gala, she said, her voice steady again, calm, decided. Adrian's face flooded with relief, mistaking her statement for forgiveness. Yeah, that's great. It'll be good for us to... I'm wearing gold, she continued, as if he hadn't spoken, because I'm worth more than you ever gave me credit for. He smiled, completely missing the double meaning, the warning wrapped in silk. You'll look beautiful. You always do. I know, Jasmine said, and picked up her laptop. I'm going to bed early. Big day coming. She left him standing in the kitchen with $50,000 worth of diamonds he'd bought to fix a marriage he'd already killed. He thought they were okay. He thought he'd smoothed things over. He thought she had forgiven him because he'd said the magic words, I'm sorry, I'll do better. He had no idea that in 3 days, at midnight, while champagne flowed and crowds cheered, his perfect life would detonate. Jasmine climbed into bed and pulled the divorce papers from her nightstand drawer. Catherine had filed them that afternoon. Everything was ready. She just had to wait for the clock to strike 12.
The ballroom glittered with wealth and champagne promises, every surface reflecting the kind of excess that only people with too much money could achieve without irony. Adrian stood at the center of his universe, holding court with Senator Mitchell and 2 venture capitalists whose combined net worth could buy a small country. His tuxedo fit like it had been painted on, his smile was magazine perfect, and his hand gestured with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. Jasmine stood beside him in her gold dress, the fabric clinging to her curves like liquid metal, armor disguised as elegance. Her clutch felt light in her hands, despite the weight of what it contained. She'd practiced this moment so many times in her head that it felt almost choreographed now, every word, every gesture, every breath calculated for maximum impact. The clock above the bar read 11:59. Adrian was mid-sentence, something about market disruption and scalability, when Jasmine's voice cut through his pitch like a blade through silk. I have a New Year's wish. The words were quiet but carried, the kind of statement that made people nearby pause their conversations and lean in, because humans could smell drama the way sharks smelled blood. Adrian turned to her, irritation flashing across his face before he caught himself and forced a smile for their audience. What is it, Jazz? His tone was indulgent, humoring her like a parent humors a child interrupting adult conversation. She opened her gold clutch with steady hands and pulled out the cream envelope. Around them, the crowd was beginning to notice, conversations dying in ripples as people sensed something interesting was about to happen. The orchestra continued playing something classical and forgettable, but the human attention had shifted entirely to the woman in gold and the man who'd stopped smiling. My wish is simple, Jasmine said, her voice steady and clear as crystal. I wish to be seen, to be valued, to be more than a beautiful accessory in your perfect life. Adrian's smile faltered, confusion replacing confidence. Jasmine, this isn't the time. Actually, she interrupted, and the power in her voice made him stop mid-sentence. It's the perfect time. She held out the envelope between them like an offering, like evidence, like the ending he'd written without realizing it. These are divorce papers, Adrian. I'm done being invisible.
The room erupted in gasps, sharp intakes of breath from 100 throats, phones emerging from pockets and clutches, the delicious scandal of it spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Adrian's face cycled through emotions faster than she could track them. Shock, confusion, anger, panic. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, acutely aware of the eyes on them. "We can discuss this at home." "No," Jasmine said calmly, and she'd never felt more powerful than in this moment of absolute devastation. "Because you're never home, Adrian. You're always working, always busy, always choosing everything but me." "I gave you everything." His voice rose despite himself, desperation making him careless. "This penthouse, your lifestyle, the jewelry." "You gave me things," Jasmine corrected, her voice cutting through his protests. "You never gave me you." She turned slightly, addressing not just Adrian but the crowd that had formed a loose circle around them, all these wealthy, powerful people watching the untouchable Adrian Castellano come apart. "You never gave me you." She turned slightly, addressing not just Adrian but the crowd that had formed a loose circle around them, all these wealthy, powerful people watching the untouchable Adrian Castellano come apart. "And I stopped asking because I realized something important. I don't need you to see me. I see myself." "Is she the one who runs Reclaim Digital?" someone whispered from the crowd, the words carrying in the sudden hush. Adrian's head snapped toward the voice, then back to Jasmine, confusion adding another layer to his crumbling composure. "What? What are they talking about?" "Surprise," Jasmine said, and smiled, genuinely smiled, with the kind of sad satisfaction that came from finally revealing a truth too long hidden. "While you were building your empire and ignoring your wife, I built my own. Reclaim Digital. 400,000 in revenue this year. I have clients, a team, a reputation I earned without your name or your money or your permission. I did it all from our guest bedroom while you were too busy to notice I existed." The countdown began somewhere behind them, the crowd unable to resist the pull of tradition even in the face of spectacular personal drama. 10, 9, 8. Adrian's mask was cracking, pieces of his perfectly constructed facade falling away to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. His eyes were wild, searching her face for the woman who used to shrink herself to fit his life. "Jasmine, please." 7, 6, 5. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your career anymore," Jasmine continued, her voice rising above the countdown. "I'm choosing myself. Happy New Year, Adrian." 4, 3, 2. She placed the envelope in his frozen hand, his fingers closing around it reflexively, like someone catching something falling. 1. The ballroom exploded with cheers and confetti and champagne corks popping like gunfire. The orchestra launched into Auld Lang Syne, and people grabbed their partners and kissed and celebrated, while Adrian Castellano stood paralyzed at the center of his own party, holding the proof that his perfect life had been an illusion. Jasmine turned and walked toward the exit. Each step felt like learning to breathe after 5 years underwater. Her head was high, her spine straight, her gold dress catching light as she moved through the crowd that parted for her like she was someone important, which she realized she finally was. Behind her, cutting through the noise and music and celebration, she heard Adrian call her name. "Jasmine!" The desperation in his voice was almost physical, heavy with the weight of too late realizations and losses that couldn't be undone. For just a moment, her steps faltered. 5 years of conditioning screamed at her to turn around, to go back, to fix it, to make him feel better, even as she destroyed herself. She didn't look back. She pushed through the double doors into the December night, leaving behind the party and the shock and the man who'd finally learned her name just as she was walking out of his life forever.
The loft office had exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with light. the kind of light that made everything look like possibility. Jasmine sat at her desk, reclaimed wood because the irony was too perfect to resist, and watched her team of 12 move through the open workspace like a well-choreographed dance. Designers collaborating over laptops, account managers on calls, the hum of creative energy that came from people who actually enjoyed what they did and who they did it with. 6 months. That's how long it had been since she'd walked out of Adrian's gala and into her own life. 6 months since the divorce papers had been filed, processed, finalized with a speed that only happened when both parties had expensive lawyers and one party desperately wanted it over. 6 months since she'd become just Jasmine Porter again, no Castellano attached like an anchor. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen without picking it up. Adrian. The 7th text this week, joining the dozens from previous weeks that sat unread in her messages. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances, former mutual acquaintances really, since most of them had chosen sides, and she'd been relieved to lose them, that he'd been a mess. Distracted in meetings, losing deals, calling her lawyer weekly asking if she'd reconsider, if they could talk, if there was any chance. She felt nothing. Not vindication, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a clean, clear sense of freedom, like she'd been carrying a heavy coat through summer and finally remembered she could take it off. Jasmine? Her assistant, Maya, the boutique owner who'd been her first client and was now her right hand, poked her head into the office. "Your 2 o'clock is here. The book deal meeting?" Jasmine smiled and closed her laptop. "Send them in." The publisher wanted her story, the whole messy, painful, triumphant thing. Reclaim, How I Built an Empire While Married to One. She'd pitched it as a business memoir about building a company from scratch, but they'd sensed the emotional weight beneath it, the universal truth that women everywhere would recognize. Sometimes you have to save yourself because no one else will. The meeting ran long, negotiations about advances and deadlines and marketing strategies. When it finally ended, Jasmine had a book deal that would have made the version of herself from a year ago faint with disbelief. She texted her mother, her college roommate, the small circle of people who'd supported her through the divorce and its aftermath. That night, she met 3 friends for dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant in the Mission, the kind of place Adrian would have considered beneath him, too casual, too crowded, not impressive enough. They squeezed into a corner booth and talked over pho and spring rolls about everything and nothing. Relationships, careers, the new season of a show they were all watching. When Jasmine made a joke about her disastrous marriage, they laughed with her instead of tiptoeing around it like it was a wound that might still bleed. She laughed, really genuinely laughed, until her stomach hurt and tears streamed down her face. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this light, this unburdened, this completely herself. Later, she took the bus home to her 1-bedroom apartment in Hayes Valley. It was modest compared to the penthouse, 800 square feet versus 4,000, street noise instead of silence, a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But it was hers. Every piece of furniture she'd chosen, every picture on the wall, every book on the shelf reflected who she actually was instead of who she'd been pretending to be. She poured herself a glass of wine and stepped onto the small balcony, looking out at the city lights sprawling toward the bay. Summer fog was rolling in, softening everything, turning the world dreamlike. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw Adrian's name lighting up the screen one more time. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she swiped left and deleted it without reading, the same way she deleted all the others. Whatever he had to say, apologies, explanations, pleas, didn't matter anymore. That chapter was closed. The book was finished. She was writing something new now. In the reflection of the window behind her, she caught her own image, a woman in comfortable clothes holding a glass of wine, hair natural and unstyled, face bare of makeup, smiling at nothing in particular. She looked different than she had 6 months ago, lighter, younger somehow despite being older, more herself than she'd been in 5 years. She raised her glass to the woman in the reflection, this stranger who'd become familiar again, this person she'd almost lost and fought so hard to reclaim. "Happy New Year, Jasmine," she whispered to herself,
to the city, to the future that stretched ahead like an open road. And this time, finally, completely, beautifully, it really was.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. We love you.